The official Pro League Power Rankings have been released by our friends at CODGamepedia, and today I want to talk about which teams I think we could see rise throughout the season and which teams I think we could also see start to fall throughout the season as well. And I want to go and start off with a few teams that I think we could also start to see go lower as time goes on. Our current second seed in the Power Rankings is United. Ever since this team formed, I began talking about my issue with this roster and slang power. Can they really compete with the top three or the big threes of other teams out there with Optic Gaming? And you talk about Splice's big three and even LG's to a point. And I still believe this. I don't think that JCap was the right choice to go to United. Everyone's big talk up of saying, oh, he was definitely the right choice to go with. My thing was that they have an in-game leader. They have, RCs who like to talk. They have Clayster for the leadership. My thing is that they didn't really need another leader in that situation. What they needed was a designated Slayer who can rock out with whatever weapon they need to have. And depending on the role issues at certain times or which weapon is kind of the weapon of choice, they need someone to kind of go off with a particular weapon. And at Vegas, right, they obviously finished off in second. Super impressive performance, but my thing is that they had Arstees put up a performance, especially in the respawns. Arstees was the man dominating for this team. I mean, he was absolutely going up for the roster, and I feel like for other teams who kind of existed around them, we saw Optic have a team effort, right? Dashy was by far the MVP, but it was a team effort. You talk about a few other rosters. I mean, Gunless was by far the lead man, but in certain game modes, we saw John go off. We saw Formal with a consistent performance as well, and with Splice, the entire team was playing well. Temp was having a fantastic performance, but it was the whole team who was leading the way. For United, it wasn't really the case. As far as slang is considered, and especially in respawns, it was Arceties. Let's go and talk about team averages. Out of the top four teams, team averages without their top player. So KDs, all of those averaged without the best player being taken into that particular stat. Optic without Dashy still had a 1.09 KD. Splice without Temp, a 1.07 KD. Luminosity without Gunless, 1.04 KD. United without Arceties was a 0.98. So with Arceties not on the map, the team is going negative. Now, those can still lead to map victories, but for me, I'm super interested to see how United especially is affected by Stock 2 now out of the game, because they desperately need someone to help out Arceties when it comes down to that Sog role. Everyone knows Arceties with the Maddox or the ICR from time to time is dominant, right? He's going to roam around the map. No issues with Arceties, I think, when it comes down to this roster and that particular role. My thing is that how is that going to affect Abizi? How is that going to affect Prestini whenever they're roaming throughout the map? Because Abizi, by definition, was the team's third option. Clayster was kind of there for the second role. Depending on how things change up, I think that Sogs right now, which we didn't get to see E-United at the PLQ, that would have been huge to see how Abizi and Prestini stats would have been boosted, because we saw players like Scraps, players like Zed, their stats go through the roof after a huge update like that. So I'm imagining that E-United through the scrimmages, right, heading into the Pro League, have been really practicing with those things, so I'm curious to see how they're going to respond, because they desperately need a number 2 and number 3 option. I think JCap and Clayster are great to have on the team, but I think it's going to be difficult to try to contend when you have two guys who are somewhat known for not necessarily slang as of recently. Clayster definitely more as far as the slang is considered, and JCap not necessarily. So I'm curious to see how this team does moving forward. Next roster I am very worried about to see how they kind of continue on is going to be Evil Geniuses. And we've seen some random improvements from players that, to me, make this team incredibly inconsistent. And granted, I'm not a person to throw out the word inconsistent when there have only been two events that are totally different from one another regarding a qualifier with a different, type of overall setup compared to what we have now. So I'm going to go over a few things. Exotic at Vegas was amazing. He was, based on stats, probably one of the MVP just based off of overall KDs alone. He had a 1.23 overall, a 1.42 in Search and Destroy. He led the team in every KD-based game mode. Now, Exotic goes to the PLQ, 1.02 overall, 0.83 in Search and Destroy. Led the team in no KD-based game mode. Now, let's talk about Royalty, right? Because Royalty had an insane tournament at the PLQ. Exotic goes from here to here at the same time. Royalty rises, and then he falls as well. Or falls and then rises, obviously, based on that. Royalty at Vegas, 1 overall KD. 0.77 in Control. Led the team in no KD-based game mode. And then Royalty at the PLQ, 1.24 overall, 1.34 in control, 1.39 in hardpoint. Led the team in every KD-based game mode except for search and destroy. And now that can be based on roles. You could obviously argue a certain play styles, how those change, how that could affect things. And then I also want to talk about Facento as well, because this is my big thing. I think we'll probably see either Royalty or Exotic hopefully kind of get to a normal playing field to the point where they're kind of two consistent players rather than, one extreme to the other. To me, Facento is going to be the guy who is that third option, or at times is needed for that second option. Because I don't think you're going to see Gunjar go off with the ICR. I don't think Fellow has put up enough numbers as of yet to prove that he can be a stable big three option either. And we saw Facento right at Vegas. Totally different team, totally different role, 0.76. Huge improvement from Vegas to the PLQ, new team, new role. But we've seen Facento, right, in past play super well with the weapon that was dominant. We go back to CWO Vegas 2017. The OSA was in use, MVP of the tournament, 1.20 overall KD. After the tournament ends, the OSA gets out of the meta, and he finishes off with like a 0.96 KD throughout the rest of Infinite Warfare. Is that the same thing we're going to see happen here, right? Is that the same thing we're going to see go through for this moment? Is that, like I said, we've seen him play well, but now with the SOG having a huge decline, right, with Stock 2 now being taken out due to gentlemen's agreements, that's going to affect his play, right? And that could also affect Royalty and Exotic, who I know all three of those guys at times I think could have a SOG in their hand, depending on how the play styles roll. I think we've seen Exotic with the Maddox sometimes. I know the roles are set differently than that. However, I think we could all see them with an SMG of some sort in their hands from time to time. So for me, you have Exotic and Royalty, which have shown to be somewhat inconsistent. Facento scares me, and I think he could be nerfed with this new update. And for Evil Geniuses, we just need to see something consistent. We need to see something kind of be an outlier for me that shows that, hey, this can be a top contender, and they can be, in that top 8 type echelon at all times. It just worries me for right now. Now, a few teams I think could go higher, and this might surprise a few people based on the talk that I've had about them in prior segments. 100 Thieves. I think this team has a lot of potential moving forward. From what I've been able to kind of take note of in their scrims, they've been rapidly improving, especially in the respawns, having super close games, taking down some Titan-like rosters in certain maps that isn't really as expected. And for those who did miss, they did add Priesthood to the lineup from FaZe. He is on loan, and they also add Crowder as the coach for this team as well. And for me, this immediately changes the culture of the roster, right? You have 3 new voices now, 2 of which who I think are going to be incredibly prominent and change the culture of this lineup, like I said. Kenny now back with the weapon that he wants to run. The big issue for 100T so far up to this year has been arguments, and those arguments have especially stemmed from the idea that players need to run different weapons. Octane running the Maddox, Slasher running the ICR. Those are now flip-flopped. Pharaoh not really necessarily wanting to run the SOG. Kenny not wanting to run the SOG either. They want to have the Maddox in their hands. I mean, pretty much everything has been switching up from event to event, and that can lead to a lot of hostile moments and a lot of awkward conversation. So for me, there's going to be a lot on the line as of this moment, because I think what needs to happen for this team and what really needs to be the case, because we haven't really seen a whole lot that suggests there is a top slayer on this roster, and I'll get back to what I was about to say. There hasn't necessarily been much disparity between the top 3 players on this lineup from event to event. At Vegas, Slasher led the team with a 1.08 overall KD. The next highest was right behind him at a 1.04 and then a 1.02. At the POQ, it's not much better. 1.03 for Slasher, 1.02, 1.01 for the next following 2 players. There is pretty much no disparity between the top 3. And to me, that could be a role issue. That could just be based on how the teams are trading, however that may be. I'm worried about this team when it comes down to that in previous. Now, they changed things up, right? Kenny now has a weapon that he wants in his hands. They add Priesta, who to me could be a little bit iffy with the SOG just because he's not used to running that role in this game as of yet. I mean, he came into the PLQ practicing with the ICR, having the Maddox in his hands, and then over time transitions into the SOG at the very end of the tournament and looked great with it. However, it is a little bit early. I think, however, though, he is going to provide a lot for this team. And one thing for me, if Kenny's role with the Maddox doesn't work, let's say it doesn't pan out for Kenny the way that they intended, he's maybe kind of back to his old role, he can switch back to the SOG, and they know what they're going to get out of Priesta, right? Priesta is fantastic with an assault rifle in his hands. He looked great with an SMG as well, but you know what you're going to get out of him in the assault rifle category. So you've got basically, on paper, the possibility for 4 players to be dominant and who were dominant last year to all play well here again. You got Slasher, you have Octane with the ICR, like I said. You've got, like I said, Kenny from time to time if he can play well with the Maddox, and you have Priesta. So this team, to me, can make sense. And if Kenny isn't playing well, you had that substitute in Pharaoh who could also be brought in as well. But I think this team's culture has totally changed. I think they have a new frame of mind heading into Division B. And I think they're going to be coming out firing. I really do. I think they look a lot better. And I know their early scrims versus Optic made everyone think, oh my gosh, this was the wrong change. This was the wrong thing to be looking out for. And while nothing is set in stone yet, I think that they desperately are seeing an improvement when it comes down to the chemistry, which you could argue could be more important. Next roster that I want to talk about quickly that I think could improve is Red Reserve. Yes, I was giving a lot of flack toward them in regards to my top 5 players to watch. I've been really kind of keeping an eye out for Bance just because we haven't really seen a whole lot from him this year. I will say, if Red Reserve makes the right decisions in regards to their roles, I think we could see them improve. Now, what do they need to do? Like I said, I think for me, they need to switch the roles. I think they need to change a few things up. Scraps, without question, was their hard carry at the PLQ. This team didn't really improve from Vegas to the PLQ with keeping the roles somewhat the same. Well, at Vegas, they lost to Evil Geniuses in pools. They lost to UIU in pools. They went down to the losers bracket and lost to Team Space, who is now Genji and is also in their group or their division for the Pro League. At the PLQ, who'd they lose to? They lost to EG, they lost to UIU, and they also lost to Genji, right? So the same rosters clearly not improving whatsoever, and they barely beat G2 for a qualification spot, and Rated in round 11, game 5 was blessed by the COD gods to somehow get an Annihilator despite going 1-7. So for me, we didn't really see a whole lot of improvement from this team, and I think they realized that. And I think they're kind of going back to the drawing board and saying, hey, we need some options here. Like Zero is improving. Scraps is obviously great, but we're not really getting a whole lot out of our other 3. And with the ICR being the way that it is as of this moment, there isn't a whole lot you can do. And I think for Rated, what needs to happen is that they're going to switch the second ICR, which has been Bance, now to the main ICR role, allow for Rated to kind of have the Maddox in his hands. And he has proved himself, especially in World War II. I mean, he was fantastic when it came down to pretty much just a Slayer mentality. He was dominant throughout most of the year. So I think if they can kind of speed him up a little bit, put a Maddox in his hands, and allow him to kind of make the money that he has been in previous titles with a weapon that will work well as far as the slang is considered, I think they're going to be fine. I really do. I think they can be good because the Maddox is the money right now. And Rated has shown incredibly skilled, or how incredibly skilled he can be in slang positions. And I think they need to pretty much designate a third or even second piece behind a great Scraps and an improving Zero. Now, a few other teams that I think we could also see kind of toward the bottom side and make a little bit of noise, one of those being E6. I think that that team has the possibility to raise up a little bit higher. They looked fantastic at the PLQ. That kind of main 3 that you have now with General, Frosty, and Kismet looks fantastic. And they have a super solid slang front. I'm a huge fan of Diabolic's role. I was watching him play fantastic at the tournament. He was kind of setting up his teammates, playing well in Search and Destroy. I think that they can be a real contender from time to time. My only thing was that while they did play super well right at the PLQ, many were talking about Midnight, many were talking about Envy. The same thing, right, for E6. They go 5-1 in their group, and they also finish off 17-6 in map count, which is incredibly impressive, but you have to keep in mind that they didn't beat anyone in the Pro League, right? They beat Team Sween, they beat FaZe, Project 18, FC Black, and Team Divine. They lost to Reciprocity in a 2-3 fashion. So while there are many saying, you know, oh my gosh, Enigma 6, they look so good at the PLQ, how can you not rank them higher? They're playing against a team or playing against teams who technically weren't even in the top 16 overall. So you have to take that in consideration. I think they can be a top squad, and I think based off of what we've seen so far from General, Frosty, and Kismet's play, that could be a super solid team who's led by a guy like Diabolic, who I think is incredibly unselfish and can really bring a lot to the team, along with Coach Cinder, who has a lot of chemistry with this lineup. So I think that they could raise a little bit higher, but for me, I think for Enigma 6, I'm kind of okay with where they're at. Maybe you raise them up a few spots, but I think that they have the ability to fluctuate upwards a tad bit. One team that I also think that I want to quickly touch on that I think we could see fall, and for me is still pretty much up in the air, is Luminosity. And scrims, I mean, the main topic on Reddit as of recent has been, wow, like LG, are they really improving? Are they doing okay? Like, what's exactly happening with the roster as of this moment? And I think this is what's kind of to be expected. When this roster originally formed, this was the question that I had about the team, was that you have a main three, that's apparent. You just need to fill in the gaps, right? You need to make sure the chemistry is there. You need to make sure they're working together. And my thing with LG, granted, they placed top 4 at Vegas. They play super well, behind the leadership essentially of Gunless in that situation. I think this team can work, but if they start to lose a few Pro League matches, they start to struggle, I think in those roster league windows or those roster periods where you can make changes, it wouldn't surprise me if we hear in a few months LG's bringing in someone else, or they're bringing in, maybe a certain role player to kind of change things up a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me. And it also wouldn't surprise me if you were telling me they're facing off against Optic in the playoffs. Like, it wouldn't, for the grand finals in the playoffs, excuse me. So for me, LG is still up in the air. I think this is a team that we could even see go upward a little bit past the E Uniteds, maybe past the Splices from time to time, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they were to go down a few notches as well. So with that in mind, like I said, a lot is up in the air, but make sure to check out the official CWL standings and power rankings done by our friends at CODGamepedia on Twitter, and by checking out their website, cod.gamepedia.com.